Crisis is not an interruption. A philosophical address on crisis, structure, and becoming by Yuji Iwasaki. I want to begin not with a story. I want to begin with a question. What if everything you have been taught about crisis is structurally wrong? Not emotionally wrong, not philosophically nuanced, structurally wrong. The way a map is wrong when it shows a road that does not exist. Most frameworks for understanding human suffering treat crisis as an interruption, a rupture in the otherwise linear progression of a life, something that arrives, damages, and must then be repaired so that life may continue. This is the dominant grammar of human suffering: before the break, and the return. I am proposing a different grammar. Crisis is not an interruption of life. It is life, at its most structural. The period we identify as breaking down is not the opposite of becoming. It is, in many cases, the precise condition that makes becoming possible. Not metaphorically, structurally. The Zen philosopher Daisetsu Suzuki wrote of a particular state, when the bow is broken and the arrows are spent, not as failure, as a rival. He wrote that to shoot an arrow without an arrow, with a bowless bow, is to pierce stone. That the passing through crisis is absolutely essential in order to reach every kind of root. What Suzuki is describing is not resilience. It is not recovery. It is something prior to both: the structural function of total depletion. When everything has been stripped away, not metaphorically, but actually, what remains is not nothing. What remains is the root, the base frequency of a self, the thing that was always there, beneath every constructed identity. I will speak briefly, precisely, from my own history. For several years, I lived in a room with almost no light, a borrowed space, a window that faced a concrete wall. Even at midday, the room stayed dark. During that period, every morning, I climbed onto a chair. I placed a rope around my neck, and I stood there until exhaustion brought me down. And I lay on the floor, and the thought that came each morning was quiet and factual. Again, I did not die. I am not offering this as testimony. I am offering it as data. Because what interests me now, what has interested me for years, is not what I suffered. It is what that state revealed about the architecture of a life, about what is stripped away when everything is stripped away, and what, impossibly, remains. What remains was not strength, not hope, not purpose. What remained was structure, the bare fact of existing. A minimal, persistent presence that could not explain itself and did not need to. That structure, that irreducible remainder, is where this philosophy begins. There is a concept I want to examine. Not emptiness as absence, not incompleteness as failure. Emptiness, in the philosophical sense I am using here, is not a deficiency. It is a condition. It is the condition of being open, porous, available, not yet foreclosed. A vessel that is full cannot receive. A structure that is complete cannot change. The thing that is hollow is the thing that can resonate. I was, for a long time, what I can only describe as hollow. Not as metaphor, as experience. I wrote plays for 7 years, excavating the interior for material, and found, each time, that there was nothing there. No stable core, no fixed identity, nothing to anchor language to. Most frameworks treat this as pathology, as emptiness to be filled, as incompleteness to be completed. I now understand it differently. The capacity to receive, to be changed, to remain unfinished, is not the opposite of maturity. It may be its precondition. The psychoanalyst Fairbairn described the final stage of emotional development as mature dependence. Not independence, dependence of a mature kind. The capacity to genuinely rely on another, to be held and to allow it. What this implies philosophically is significant. Completeness, in the conventional sense, self-sufficiency, closure, arrival, is not the horizon. The horizon is a particular kind of openness, an openness earned through the passage. Incompleteness is not the condition before completeness. It is completeness at a deeper register. The incomplete thing is still forming, still absorbing, still in relation. The complete thing has stopped. We have built our systems of value, educational, social, economic, psychological, around the idea that progress means moving toward completion, filling in, closing gaps, arriving. I am suggesting something more uncomfortable, that the gaps are structural, that the gaps are not failures of formation. They are how formation breathes. Crisis is not an interruption. Part 2. At 6 years old, I stole a piece of candy from a shop. My father took me to the nearby police station. He had the officer put real handcuffs on me. Black, heavy, cold. I do not tell this story for sympathy. I tell it because it illustrates a structural principle. Punishment preceded understanding. Response preceded inquiry. The child's interiority, the loneliness that drives a 6-year-old to steal, was not a category in the framework being applied. The framework was wrong. Not cruel, not evil. Wrong. Structurally, philosophically wrong. It had no room for the interior life of the person it was processing. This is a precise description of what I call the wrong world. Not the world as a hostile place. The world as a framework that cannot see you, and therefore cannot receive you, and therefore cannot hold you. The wrong world does not ask, what is happening inside you? It asks, are you performing correctly? And when you cannot perform correctly, when your interior life refuses the shape of the framework, when your body says no, when everything in you goes quiet and still, the wrong world has one interpretation: defect. There is a particular form of suffering that arises from this, not from the events themselves, from the misclassification. To be told, structurally, if not explicitly, that your response to an unlivable situation is the problem, that your withdrawal, your silence, your refusal, your breakdown is the error, is a specific violence. It compounds the original injury with an interpretive one. Now you are not only in pain, you are wrong to be in pain. Now you are not only struggling, your struggle is a failure. And so the question shifts, not what is wrong with me, but what is wrong with the framework that cannot see me? The world is wrong, not you. This is not a consolation. It is a philosophical claim. The framework that could not hold you is deficient, not you. The template that required you to be other than you were, the one that named your withdrawal as failure, your silence as pathology, your incompleteness as disorder, that template was inadequate to the complexity of a human life. You were more complex than the framework. That is not a flaw. That is information. I want to introduce a concept. I call it the passant position. Passant, from the French, means one who passes through. a traveler in transit, not a resident, not a visitor, a passer through. The passant does not arrive. The passant does not belong. The passant moves through, and the movement itself is the condition. I arrived at this position not through intellectual abstraction. I arrived at it through a very specific experience. I was in the darkest period of my life, isolated, exhausted, having exhausted even the part of me that was trying to keep me alive, when one night, in the rain, I had a quiet thought. A thought that asked about a park I had visited as a child. What did it look like now? I put on a coat. I walked out the door, in the rain, in the dark, with no destination I could reach that night, and I began to walk. I did not recover that night. I did not heal. I did not decide anything. I simply moved. And the movement, purposeless, undirected, too exhausted for intention, was the beginning of something. At 34, I wrote in my diary, "In that way, my body moved first, and the mind arrived later." This is the passant position. The passant does not plan the passage. The passant is moved by something prior to intention, prior to narrative, prior to meaning. And the meaning, if it comes afterward, carried in the body's wake. The passant position is not optimism. It does not assert that things will improve. It makes only a structural claim, that passing through is itself a form of presence, that transit is not absence from life. Transit is life. The passant does not resolve the paradox of existence. The passant occupies it. To live as a passant is to accept that the passage is not a corridor between two rooms. There is no other room. The passage is the room. Your life is not happening between its meaningful moments. Your life is happening in the passing through. This position has a consequence. If the passage is the condition, if transit is presence, not absence, then nothing is wasted. Not years spent in a dark room, not mornings on a chair, not the exhaustion, not the refusal. None of it was the time before the life began. It was the life. Crisis is not an interruption. Part 3. I want to be precise about this distinction. Recovery implies a prior state to which one returns, a baseline, a pre-injury condition. The project of recovery is, in essence, conservative, to restore what was. But what if the pre-injury condition was itself the problem? What if the thing you are recovering from was already a distortion, a self-constructed under impossible conditions, shaped by frameworks that could not see you, trained into contortions that allowed you to survive, but not to exist? Then recovery is not the goal, because the thing you would recover is already wrong. Becoming is a different movement. Becoming does not return. Becoming proceeds. There is no baseline to restore. There is only the ongoing formation of something, a self, that has never existed before and will not exist again. I am not the person I was before the crisis, not because I survived it and grew, but because the crisis was one of several events of renewal, moments when the accumulated weight of a previous self was reset, absorbed, and a different body began to walk. I gave a name to this, the making of the past into a previous life. The suffering versions of me, several of them at several ages, are not behind me in the sense of being overcome. They are behind me in the sense of being prior. They are previous lives, not mine to carry forward, mine to have inhabited and passed through. This is not forgetting. It is not suppression. It is a structural shift in temporal relationship. The previous life is still present, the way a previous century is still present in the structure of a building. But you do not live there. You live in the building as it stands now. I want to say something about irresponsibility. The people who helped me most were not those with formal obligations, not systems delivering interventions. They were what I came to call irresponsible strangers. People who appeared without duty, who said things that were structurally true without intending a program. One said, "Being a bad person, that is fine." Another said simply, "I worry alongside you," and then sat in silence. These were not techniques, they were presences, and their value was precisely in the absence of agenda. The irresponsible stranger does not try to move you toward recovery. The irresponsible stranger simply is there. And in being there, without ownership, without agenda, without the weight of formal responsibility, they create a space in which something can shift. Not because they intend it, because they are present without demand. This is philosophically significant because it suggests that the most transformative encounters are not designed. They are accidental in form and structural in effect. You cannot plan to be an irresponsible stranger. You can only be available. Being incomplete is complete. Let me be precise about what this does and does not mean. It does not mean that incompleteness is good. It does not mean that suffering is secretly a gift. It does not mean that everything happens for a reason. It means something quieter and more structural. A self that is still forming is not a failed self. A life that has not arrived at resolution is not a failed life. The state of being in process, mid-passage, mid-formation, uncertain of contour, is not a deficiency. It is the state of being alive. The complete thing has stopped. The complete thing is finished. The complete thing no longer changes, no longer receives, no longer passes through. The in-progress thing is still in relation, still capable of being surprised, still porous to the world. This is the philosophical claim I want to leave with you, not as consolation, but as structure. In progress is not the condition before completeness. In progress is completeness, in motion. Nietzsche wrote of amor fati, love of fate. He compressed it into a phrase, once more this dreadful life. Not gratitude, not acceptance, something harder than both. A willingness to affirm, not the meaning of suffering, but the existence of it. To say, this is what happened. This is what I am made of. I would not remove it, because to remove it would be to remove the structure. I do not ask you to feel that. I only ask you to notice. This is a different orientation to a life than recovery. Recovery says, despite what happened, I am still here. Amor fati says, because of what happened, including its weight, its darkness, its specificity, I am what I am. And what I am is still becoming. The philosopher does not conclude. The philosopher marks a position. This is mine. I passed through crisis. I did not recover from it. I did not transcend it. I did not find meaning in it in the way that meaning is usually meant, as explanation, as purpose, as compensation. I passed through it. And in the passing, I found a structure. Not a lesson, a structure. The structure is this. Life does not move from incomplete to complete. Life moves, always, without arrival, without resolution, without final form, through itself. And that movement, that continuous, unresolved, unfinished passage, is not the preliminary to something. It is the